After my husband died, I transferred $500 every month to pay off his debts. Then one day the bank called me. "Ma'am, your husband never had any debts." So where exactly had my money been going for over a year? Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again from Family Justice Vault. Please subscribe and let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I used to believe grief had a shape you could see coming, like a storm on the horizon. I was wrong. Robert and I had been married for 19 years when his heart simply stopped on a Tuesday morning while he was tying his shoes. 19 years of Sunday pancakes, of him humming off-key in the shower, of small arguments about the thermostat that never once felt like real anger. I was 54, and I had never imagined a life without him in our little house outside Dayton, Ohio. The months after the funeral are still blurry. Casseroles on the porch, sympathy cards I couldn't throw away, silence pressing against my ears at night. It was in that fog that Carol came to me. Carol was Robert's older sister, a sharp-tongued woman who never quite warmed to me, not in 19 years. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, hands folded the way they always were before bad news, and told me Robert had been hiding something. Gambling debts, she said. He was ashamed. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Robert balanced our checkbook to the penny. He clipped coupons. He was too cautious with money, not too reckless. But Carol had brought papers, printed statements, the name of a collection agency I didn't recognize, and her own quiet insistence that she didn't want to see me drag the family name through a public bankruptcy. Beside her sat Brooke, Robert's daughter from his first marriage, 28 years old and dry-eyed in a way that should have told me something. "There's a way to handle this quietly," Brooke said. "A private repayment plan, $500 a month, keeps it off the record, keeps Dad's name clean. Grief makes you stupid, I know that now, so I agreed." I wired $500 on the first of every month to an account Carol set up, made out to something called Heritage Resolution Services. I told myself it was the last gift I could give Robert. 14 months passed this way. 14 checks. $7,000 quietly bled out of the retirement savings Robert and I had built together. I never saw a contract. I never questioned why a collection agency wanted personal transfers through Carol's own banking app instead of a business account. The first crack came on an ordinary Thursday in March. I was going through old paperwork, finally deciding to refinance the house, and I called Robert's old bank just to confirm there were no liens before I moved forward. The representative, a kind-voiced woman named Diane, put me on hold for what felt like forever. When she came back, her tone had changed. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I'm looking at your husband's full credit history going back to 2003. There's no debt here. There never was. His accounts were always in excellent standing. He didn't owe a single dollar." I sat very still, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. "That's not possible," I said. "There were collection notices, a repayment plan." "I don't know what to tell you," Diane said gently. "There's nothing here, not even a late payment." I hung up and looked at the stack of statements Carol had given me. The ones I'd never thought to question, because grief doesn't leave room for suspicion. 14 months, $7,000. And one question began to form in my mind, cold and sharp as broken glass. If my husband never had any debts at all, then where exactly had my money been going? I sat at that table for nearly an hour, not moving. Not the dramatic stillness you see in movies, but something quieter and heavier, like a stone settling at the bottom of a lake. I thought about Carol's folded hands, Brooke's dry eyes. How easily I'd believed them, because believing them had felt like the last act of love I could perform for a man who couldn't speak for himself anymore. Fear came in waves that evening. Fear of accusing Robert's own sister of fraud. Fear of being the bitter widow who tore the family apart over money. I had spent my whole life avoiding conflict. But underneath the fear, something else was rising. Anger, slow and steady. The kind that comes from realizing someone looked at your grief and saw not a person to comfort, but a wallet to open. I made myself put the phone down rather than call Carol right then. Confronting someone with no evidence only gives them time to build a story. I needed proof. I dug through old emails for any record from Heritage Resolution Services and found almost nothing. No letterhead, no tax ID, no working customer service line, just one email address that bounced back. I found the routing number Carol had given me and underlined it twice, because something about a personal routing number attached to a supposed collection agency struck me as deeply wrong. Even with my limited financial knowledge. By midnight, I'd decided, no calls to Carol or Brooke. In the morning, I'd call a lawyer, someone with no loyalty to anyone in this story but me. The law office of Marisol Vance sat above a dry cleaner, a modest space with worn carpet. I'd found her through an online search the night before, a specialist in elder and widow financial exploitation. She listened without interrupting for nearly 20 minutes, then set her pen down. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "what you're describing has a name. Grief-based financial exploitation. Family members using a person's vulnerability right after a death to extract money under false pretenses. The vague paperwork, the personal routing number, the lack of any verifiable institution. It concerns me." She took my case and filed a request with the bank for the complete transaction history. Banks move slowly. In the meantime, she told me to say nothing to Carol or Brooke. Let them believe everything is normal. People who are hiding something get careless when they think no one is looking. It was harder than it sounded. 3 days later, Carol called, voice syrupy with concern, asking whether the next payment had gone through smoothly. I forced my voice flat and grateful. Of course, same as always. But she lingered a beat too long before hanging up, and Brooke texted the next morning, an oddly specific question about whether I'd spoken to the bank lately. I didn't answer. They were watching me as closely as I was watching them. It took 11 days for the records to arrive. Marisol slid a thick folder across her desk on a rainy Thursday. "I want you to take your time," she said. The account labeled Heritage Resolution Services was not a collection agency at all. It was a personal checking account opened 18 months earlier, 2 months before Robert's death, under the name Carol A. Whitfield. Not a business. My sister-in-law's own account, registered to her own home, 3 streets from ours. And tucked into the folder, a printout from a payment processor showing recurring transfers from that same account directly to Brooke's personal Venmo, almost monthly. In amounts of $100 to $300. The room tilted slightly. Robert had never owed anyone a cent. There had never been a debt, never a collection agency, never anything but 2 women who looked at a grieving widow and built, brick by brick, a quiet, believable lie. "This is enough to move forward," Marisol said. "This is documented financial fraud. We can file a formal complaint, pursue civil recovery, and depending on the district attorney, this could become criminal." I looked up at her. "Let's do it. Let's file." By Wednesday, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Carol's first messages were pleading. "Linda, there's been a misunderstanding." By Thursday, the tone had shifted entirely. "You ungrateful woman. After everything this family did for you, Robert would be ashamed of what you're doing to his sister." I forwarded every recording to Marisol. "This is good for us," she said. Threats only strengthen a fraud case, but it was Brooke's visit that frightened me most. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday, pushed past me into the entryway uninvited, furious, with panic underneath the fury. "If this goes to court, I'll tell everyone what kind of wife you really were. How you and Dad were having problems before he died. People always believe the grieving daughter over the second wife." It was a lie. Robert and I never had problems, but watching her hands shake, I understood she wasn't defending her innocence. She was manufacturing leverage. "Get out of my house, Brooke," I said, my heart pounding. "And if you contact me again outside of our attorneys, I'll add it to the file." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle our anniversary photo in the hallway. I cried afterward, not from fear exactly, but from the exhausting weight of being threatened by people who'd once sat at holiday dinners beside me. The pressure shifted shape over the following weeks. Carol sent a mutual friend to mediate. I declined. Brooke texted once more, almost businesslike, suggesting that if I dropped the complaint, they'd quietly repay everything, no lawyers involved. Absolutely not, Marisol said. That's an admission disguised as an offer. Don't respond. Then, almost as suddenly as it started, the pressure paused. No calls, no visits. I took the room to breathe. I drove to my sister's in Columbus for a few days, slept late, walked by the river, let her cook for me the way she used to when we were girls. I reconnected with an old friend, Denise, who simply said, "Good for you for fighting it," and then started showing up with dinner, sitting with me through the paperwork. I found a small widows support group, meeting in a church basement, 6 women whose stories echoed mine in ways that made my chest ache. A stepson who'd forged a power of attorney. A cousin who drained a retirement account. I left that first meeting with 3 new phone numbers, and, for the first time since Robert's death, the feeling that I wasn't facing this alone. It was Denise who warned me Carol had called her, fishing for information. 2 days later, on a gray Sunday, Carol and Brooke pulled into my driveway together, dressed in soft cardigans, expressions arranged for warmth and reconciliation. I cracked the door but didn't invite them in. "We just want to talk, Linda," Carol said softly. "Family to family, no lawyers." "He wouldn't want this," Brooke added, eyes glistening in a way I now recognized as performance. "He wouldn't want us tearing each other apart." There was a flicker of the old guilt in me, faint but present. Underneath it now was something sturdier. "Robert would want the truth," I said quietly. He'd want to know his sister opened a personal account using his memory to take money from his widow. That's what he'd want, not silence. Carol's softness dropped away. "You don't understand what it's like, watching my brother build a life with someone who was never really part of this family. We needed that money, Linda. Brooke's been struggling since her divorce. I lost half my retirement in 2022. You always had plenty." There it was. The belief that my grief and my savings had simply been a resource they were entitled to. "That doesn't make it legal," I said. "And it doesn't make it forgivable. You used Robert's death to steal from me for 14 months. Brooke's composure cracked into raw fury. "You'll regret this. When this goes public, nobody in this town will look at you the same way. We'll make sure of it." "That's a threat," I said, steadier than I expected. "I'm closing this conversation now, and everything you've just said is going straight to my attorney." I shut the door. Through the wood I heard Carol's voice rising before their car pulled hard out of the driveway. My hands trembled, but underneath the fear, resolve was growing steadier by the second. Marisol confirmed it that evening. "This helps us more than it hurts you, Linda. Threats made to your face only build the case further." The civil hearing came 11 months after that first call from Diane. Walking into the courthouse with Marisol and her folder of evidence felt almost unreal. Carol and Brooke arrived with a young attorney who looked perpetually uncomfortable. Neither of them looked at me. Marisol walked the judge through everything. The account opened 2 months before Robert's death. The transfers to Brooke's Venmo. The complete absence of any agency called Heritage Resolution Services in any registry. Then the voicemails, played aloud in the quiet courtroom. "You ungrateful woman." I watched Carol's own recorded fury fill the room, watched her attorney's jaw tight. On the stand, Carol's composure finally fractured. She claimed misunderstanding, then contradicted herself within minutes. "I was trying to help my brother's memory," she said, voice cracking. "You were trying to protect this family by taking $7,000 from his widow," Marisol said evenly, using an account that existed before he even died. The silence that followed felt enormous. She had no answer because there wasn't one. Brooke's testimony was worse. She admitted, haltingly, that she'd known from the beginning there were no debts. That it had been Carol's idea after Carol lost her retirement savings in a bad investment, and that Brooke went along because she needed help after her divorce. It was the first fully honest thing either of them had said. I answered every question plainly. The kitchen table conversation, the 14 months of payments. The call from Diane that cracked it all open. My voice stayed steady, not because the weight was gone, but because I'd spent nearly a year preparing for exactly this moment. By the recess, Carol wouldn't look at me, and Brooke had her face in her hands. The judge's findings came down that same afternoon. Deliberate financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Ohio law. My status as a recent widow had qualified the case for enhanced protections. Full restitution of $7,000 plus interest and legal fees. And the part that mattered most, a referral to the county prosecutor for criminal fraud charges. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, the way you do after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally being allowed to set it down. The criminal case moved fast, since the civil record was already complete. Within 3 months, formal fraud charges were filed against both women. Carol, as the one who'd opened the account and orchestrated everything, accepted a plea deal. A suspended sentence contingent on full restitution, 5 years of probation, and a permanent fraud conviction. Brooke's plea was lighter given her cooperation, but it still left her with a conviction and a debt her finances could barely manage. There was no dramatic final confrontation. Carol simply stopped attending family gatherings that included me. Not that many remained. Since most of Robert's extended family quietly distanced themselves from both of them once the details became known. Word travels fast in a town our size. I received my restitution in full over an 18-month structured settlement. It would never undo the fear and grief-fogged trust I'd given away, but it closed the chapter for good. Marisol shook my hand outside the courthouse the day the final paperwork settled. Most people never get this kind of resolution, she said. Most exploitation cases end quietly, with no one held accountable, because the victim is too exhausted or too afraid of the social cost to see it through. You didn't let that happen. It's been almost 3 years now since that Thursday call from Diane changed the course of my life, and I can say with certainty that my life today is genuinely happy. I sold the house outside Dayton 2 years ago, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood. I wanted a fresh start somewhere that didn't carry the weight of either my grief or my fight in every room. I moved closer to my sister in Columbus, into a small, bright condo near a park where I walk most mornings. I used part of the restitution money, along with training support I found through the same widows group, to complete a certification in financial counseling. Now I spend 3 days a week working with a nonprofit, helping elderly and recently widowed clients protect themselves from exactly what I lived through. There's a quiet satisfaction in sitting across from a frightened woman, recognizing the shape of what she's afraid to say, and helping her ask the questions I never knew to ask in time. Denise and I remain close, and that small church basement group has become one of the steadiest friendships in my life. We still meet most Wednesdays. Carol's life, from what I hear through the thin thread of small-town gossip, hasn't recovered easily. The sale of her house barely covered her restitution and legal fees. She lost her position at the accounting firm where she'd worked over a decade once the conviction became known, and trust is the entire currency in that field. She lives now in a small rental 2 towns over, largely estranged from what remains of the family. Brooke's path has been just as hard. Her already strained divorce finalized acrimoniously, and her ex-husband used the fraud charge in the custody proceedings, leaving her with far less time with her children than she'd hoped. She moved out of state 2 years ago and works now in a job well below the career she'd been building, since the conviction makes background checks nearly impossible to clear. I won't pretend I feel no sadness when I hear these updates. Brooke was once a young woman I'd hoped to build something real with, however complicated her feelings about her father's second marriage always were. But sadness isn't the same as regret. I don't regret, even slightly, the choice I made that ordinary Thursday in March, sitting at my kitchen table with the phone still warm in my hand. Choosing to find the truth, rather than keep paying quietly into a lie. What I have now is a life built on my own steady ground rather than borrowed grief. A career that gives my days real purpose. A small, fierce circle of women who understand exactly what it costs to stand up for yourself. And a quiet, hard-won confidence I carry into every difficult conversation since. I think of Robert often, especially on my morning walks. I believe, with the same certainty I once reserved only for grief, that he would be proud of the woman who finally refused to let his memory be used as a weapon against her. The truth, however long it takes to uncover, is always worth the fight. So I'll leave you with the same question I've asked myself many nights since. If someone you trusted used your grief against you, what would you do? If this story moved you, please subscribe to Family Justice Vault and leave a comment below. Thank you so much for listening.